seconds now. Awesome. So this session is called, it's a pretty long title, How to Decide When to Use SharePoint and Yammer and Office 365 Groups and Outlook and Skype.
And Delve.
And Delve.
And OneNote.
And OneNote.
And well, let's not announce.
Yeah. Oh, that other. Yeah, some of those things. Yeah, they're not public yet. But there's a lot of stuff that's changed, right? There's a lot of things we've seen at this conference, and so answering this question is kind of challenging. We'll come back to that, but I hope you guys are excited. When we first decided to try and tackle this subject, we realized we couldn't do it alone. So we interviewed lots and lots of people. We scoured every possible place inside of Microsoft. I asked wonderful people on the product team and lots of customers that we were working with. I also asked tons of people in the community, right? We did interviews. We interviewed lots of customers that were willing in the last month and a half or so to do an interview and tell us what was working for them, what wasn't. And from all that, we tried to create as conversational as we could a sort of a manual for this, which is at whentousewhat.com. So please feel free to download that. It's about 60 pages. But here's the thing we learned. After about 100 pages, when we realized we had to cut it all down and ship something, this is a really hard question to answer.
Very hard.
And so the big thing we want you guys to understand is in this session, we're going to try and answer all your questions, but we won't get to every single one. Our goal is more to give you a framework, some guidance, so that you can answer hopefully your own questions or explore it together with us after. So think of the white paper as a public draft, where we're all going to hopefully contribute and improve it over time. So please share your feedback vocally. My name is Richard Harbridge. The big thing to know here is that I'm really friendly. So if you haven't reached out to me or if you have questions afterwards, do not hesitate to ask me. Also, a slight change. I was working for Microsoft, but just recently have switched over to work with Kanwal to the lead. It was partly because the white paper was really fun, but also lots of other reasons for my personal life. So exciting times of change for myself and my family. And then Kanwal?
And I'm super good looking, guys. That's the main thing that you want to know today. No, it's true. I had an opportunity to be a Bollywood actor that didn't pan out. I focused more on SharePoint. And most recently, I've started being very passionate about Office 365. So I'm an Office 365 MVP. I'm out there quite a bit on community events. I blog quite a bit. I'm on Twitter as well. Awesome. And as well, I work with Richard at Lead.
And if you guys have questions, Twitter's a great place. We also have the Yammer groups. There's a sort of second screen that's going on. We'll try and answer some of those questions. If we don't get to them, we will be looking at all of that afterwards to try and get you guys some responses. So we kind of teased that this is a hard question to answer. What we wanted to do is share a little bit about why and what we learned. And not just before we even started this, we knew it was going to be challenging to answer. So
yeah, I think a lot of you here that came to the presentation are probably looking for a matrix of guidance, right? And that's probably what you're looking for is, okay, when do I use this? When do I use SharePoint? When do I use Yammer or any other product? And unfortunately, that's not the right approach. And we really want to take a step back for those of you taking pictures.
Some of you are like,
it's not the right approach,
I can't get a picture. It's okay.
Sorry,
it's okay.
Don't worry. It'll come back.
The recording is done too. It's okay. Everything in here, you can pause it and say, before those guys kept covering stuff up.
And I think the 100 pages or so, that pain that we felt going through writing that white paper and working this presentation, and just trying to get the messaging right for everyone here, I think there's 5 reasons that we want to go through why this was a complex question to answer.
So we're going to try and do this fast so we can get to more of the meat and potatoes of the session, but it is really important for us all to have expectations that are closer, because we're all coming here for different reasons.
Yeah, so make sure that the key message here is this is not a versus discussion, right? This is not SharePoint versus Yammer. This is not SharePoint versus other products. Having that mindset, that initial point of view, you're going to lead to the wrong decision. So let's go through a scenario, Rich, and kind of talk through a really good example of how we can use products.
Yep. So what we found was when we started to interview customers, and we kind of had this idea beforehand, but the truth is when you start to think of versus, you start to think of binary decisions. You start to really make very strong decisions, this is the right way, and then you start to get down to paths that you just don't want to get down to because things evolve, things change. And so we'll come back to that, but that's where the versus thing comes from. So a lot of times when we're running Office 365, when we're launching Office 365, we do things like holding a launch party. How many people have run Office 365? How many people did a launch party? Keep your hands up if you did a launch party. Wow, you guys are disappointing me already. So great way to drive some interest, provide opportunities for education, all sorts of stuff. So go to success.office.com, grab a bunch of content. You can actually get a bunch of, depending on your arrangement with Microsoft, they can give you sometimes free stuff to help out with launch parties. Really, really recommend this because it helps a lot. So let's pretend for a moment that I'm actually just a communications manager, and in my organization I want to run a launch party. Well, how might I do that? Well, I'll start an Outlook because I need to work with the IT team, I need to grab Kanwal and other people, and I need to say, hey, let's all get together, let's talk about what would a launch party entail, who's going to be involved in it, all these other things. And this is sort of an ad hoc process, so of course I'm going to create a meeting, we're going to send out the meeting, we're going to get on Skype. Then on Skype for Business, we're going to start taking meeting notes together because I'm really big on making sure we have shared notes. Then I'm going to take those notes because I don't really know where we're going to be working, so I put it in my OneDrive for Business as a temporary place. That way I can share it with everyone during the meeting. We finish off our meeting and we decide we should build an Office 365 group, because an Office 365 group is a great place for us to share with one another. It's a circle of trust because we're all working on the same thing. Right. It's really seamless and easy. We have the calendar where we can start to put all the meetings that are coming up when we're talking about the event planning and the logistics and those types of things. So great starting point. So basically the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the meeting notes that we took and I'm going to put them inside of the group rather than keeping them in OneDrive for Business, because then that way everyone has access to them. Because it's not really just mine, it's not ownership of mine, it's shared ownership, right? It's the group that's kind of own these meeting notes going forward and additional meetings. Then of course what we realize is a lot of times when you're building a launch party, you have an agenda, right? You have sessions, there's content you want to share with your big audience, because you kind of got people interested, and hey, it's a great moment to communicate to them why Office 365 is valuable, how you can use it to improve your daily life, all sorts of things like that. So we start talking about what we want to see in it. Now remember, we're in a group, so it's sort of a closed audience, and we realized we were willing to open this up and ask more people, get feedback from the ambassadors and champions and other people throughout the organization. So we go into conversation view, we open it in conversation view. Now everyone else on Yammer who has activity on Yammer sees the message, starts to communicate. We've amplified our sharing, we've amplified our feedback cycles, we've improved the agenda, and now we realize there's something else that's missing. If we're going to do a launch, we want to make sure that we have ways for people to share feedback, we have ways for people to make requests for sites, we have ways for people to do all sorts of common things that you run into when you have something like Office 365. So we create some custom list forms, we do all sorts of things like that in SharePoint, because of course this will supplement or complement our launch activities and probably live far beyond them. Then we actually take the launch itself, we do our sessions, we record those, right? Maybe we use Skype for Business or Link, and we do our recordings. We take that, then we post that into something like Office Video. Maybe we do broadcasts, right? Skype broadcasting, and we do the broadcast of our live launch party to all, from headquarters to all the other locations. So this is a common flow, and I'm just using this example. Yes, it's optimal. Yes, as an individual in the organization, I kind of knew what technology was the right next step. But the key here is this does happen. In a lot of organizations, when we talk to them, this is kind of how they started to build their guidance, how they started to educate their users. They didn't say versus this versus that. They said this and this and this and this and this, and if you do it in these ways, helps you realize these outcomes. So and is really important, because even in this simple example, we used lots and lots of quote-unquote products.
Right.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, so when you start thinking about that versus question, right, SharePoint versus Yammer, that's obviously not the right approach. So now you got to start thinking of SharePoint and Yammer. How can that be complementary? SharePoint and Outlook, SharePoint and Skype for Business, and SharePoint and OneDrive for Business. How can those technologies together provide a service for your users, for your employees, that's going to give them maximum value? And that's critical. So that's the important part, is that shift from versus to and.
And so once we realized this, we came into the second big challenge, right? So this is a challenging question to answer because you don't answer it once. You actually answer it at multiple levels. So a lot of people here said they came for organizational guidance. So think about this for a moment. When to use what is something that is part of your enterprise technology strategy, right? You know why you invested in certain technologies. You know how it offset or replaced perhaps another technology. And you might also have ideas of maybe when you should use it and when you shouldn't, again, from a high-level governance or enterprise strategy level, right? So this is important, and this is something that we should be able to answer, and this is something that every organization must answer, right? Because this ensures that we're making the right investment decisions and we understand what we own from an enterprise technology perspective. So we have this example.
I was going to say, I think that's critical not just for enterprises, but small businesses as well. And if you have 100, 200, 500 users, make sure you have some sort of guidance for your users, right? When to use a technology and when not to use it. In this example, we're talking about Outlook and Exchange. We're saying think twice. You can absolutely use it to collaborate with your team, your vendors, your partners, but think twice before using it for personal communication.
Yeah, so these are high level, right? These are generic guidelines. What you might also have is you might have very, very different guidelines depending on the technology need you're satisfying, right? So in this case, your social collaboration platform is going to have very different high-level guidance. It's going to have a different purpose. It's going to have different think twice before using scenarios. So this is just samples. There's actually quite a few more in the book that we tried to provide you. the key here is this is simplified, right? Don't use this and go implement this and say this is our corporate guidance, because this is more based on specific customers. What you want to do is take this, make it your own, clarify it, have corporate governance, figure out the right technology strategies, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a lot of work, and I wish we could do a whole talk on this, but we got to keep going. So think about this. If you answer the question when to use what at the organizational level, you haven't completed the journey. You also have to answer the question when to use what at the group and individual level. So just to be clear, organization level is foundational, right? We knew that this was, when we went into this answering this question, we knew it was going to be this way. Then you have to have groups. When we say groups, a lot of times we went back and forth on what we should name this. Champions and site owners, if you like SharePoint, or Yammer community managers and things. Yeah, ambassadors, all those types of things. So when we say group, we also sometimes mean, think of people in leadership or heavily influenced roles, right? Where we're going to give them a very different set of answers, probably a little bit more comprehensive education and support for when to use what than maybe we do at the individual user level, where it needs to be very contextual. And now, of course, we also realized really quickly when we started working with organizations and we heard from them on this subject, they basically said, look, you've got your triangle upside down. It should be this way. Because the reality is, at the organizational level, and this is so true, it's critical. And it looks like this. It's scary. It could easily tip over if we don't do this right. So really critical foundationally to have the organization part. But you know where all the effort is? Where all the weight and energy should be? Not in the organizational level. It should be, from a metric perspective, it should be more so in the individual and group level. So I have to challenge you guys, any person in this room who's part of an organization where you might have the organizational strategy piece, but you don't have group or champion guidance or individual guidance, you're missing the boat, right? You're missing a great opportunity, and we'll give you some tools to hopefully achieve that.
That's probably the biggest impact, right? Once you've provided that guidance, the enterprise strategy from an organizational perspective, now your groups, your champions, your site owners, let's say in our example for SharePoint, your site owners are now enabled with that on how to leverage technology. So in SharePoint's example, if we say, go ahead and SharePoint's the right technology to use, you still haven't provided the guidance around whether it's a site collection that you want to leverage, a web application, you want to leverage a document library, a document set, or there's a vast amount of decisions that need to be made. So being able to provide those decisions at that point also is a little bit difficult as well.
Yeah, so it goes deeper than the product level. You have to make decisions on capabilities and things like that. So when to use what? Organizational, group, individual, plus deeper than the product level.
Right.
Another big thing we quickly realized is that people aren't making one decision. In fact, we'll get to scenarios later, and we tried to originally take the scenarios and make them super prescriptive. And the reality is people ask very ambiguous questions, right? They're trying to achieve things in a generalized state, and so they don't even know sometimes what they need. Right? They just say, I think I need something like this, so let me try it. Oh, this solved my problem. Oh, not quite. I need to try something else. And this is a very different learning process, right? This is an iterative, subjective learning process. And so this is how we need to guide people. We can't just guide them with, like, here's your linear path. These are the different tools you use in these circumstances, because it's not going to work, right? And you can't just overload them and give it to them all up front, because the reality is they need to learn as they're doing, right? And so there's some interesting techniques.
Yeah, and I think one thing I want to add as well is Julia White, I think, mentioned that a couple of days ago around 80% of the workforce within about 10 or 15 years, is 80% of it is going to be the millennia. Folks who are, their attention span is focused around being able to work from any device anywhere, right? So that's a critical point, to be able to make sure that you provide them tools that they can work from one area, use another product in an efficient manner.
Yeah, so keep in mind, you're not answering the question when to use what once, you're often answering it again and again and again in very different contexts. The last one, probably the most critical one, and we'll come back to this with more details, is this fact that once a person kind of understands and learns the technology, often they keep using that technology over and over. Right? Outlook is a big offender of this, right? Because it's so awesome. It works really well, and it solves a lot of needs. But the problem is, because it works so well, every single problem I have, maybe I try and solve with email, right? I email those attachments, stop that, and so on and so forth, right? So just like the hammer and nail analogy, how many people feel that maybe you've at one point heard something like this? Hey, what can SharePoint do? Well, what do you want it to do? Well, it can do everything, right? Yeah, is that common? So we want to make sure that we understand when maybe is the right tool, when it isn't. And this is the key. It's not you knowing that. It's everyone in your organization having that sense of discovery and interest and wanting to actually explore and understand what these other tools are. And how do you get that? Well, you have to have them committing to it, right? They have to sustain that commitment. And there's very particular ways that we have for achieving this, which will be the main part of this presentation.
So guys, 5 reasons why this was a pretty tough topic. As you can share, I'm sure all of you are understanding that as well, and why you're here today. Number 1 is when to use what is multiple levels. You have to decide, and you have to be able to provide guidance both at the organizational, at the group, and as well as the individual level. That's number 1 for sure. Number 2 is technology works better together, right? We've heard this time and time again. Microsoft absolutely has the right strategy around that. allowing products to work together and increase that value, that and is critical. And then number 3 is knowing which product isn't enough. It's not enough to say it is SharePoint or it is Yammer. You can't have decisions nowadays around product usage to be so crystal clear in saying this is exactly how you want to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then remember, it's an iterative process. People are learning. They're learning more about their own needs each time, and they're learning more about the technology, right? Because we learn over time how the technology works, because technology is changing, as we've all seen at the conference with many of the announcements. And then, of course, sustaining commitment specifically is critical. So let's talk about sustaining commitment. So this is a basic formula, right? We have interest plus understanding plus value equals commitment. So in the base level, if you have an awareness, if you have an interest in something, you need that before you can understand it. Makes sense? Once we understand it, we need to guide that understanding, because otherwise people understand different things and they might interpret different things. So we want to guide the understanding to the most positive or healthy outcomes. And then, of course, we have to recognize and realize value, but we can't do that if we don't understand it, right? So these are natural sort of progression paths, but they're all connected. If you don't have one, it certainly is very, very hard to achieve something like commitment. And this works in the same way with shared, right? So shared interests, shared awareness, shared understanding, shared value, and shared or sense of value, and shared commitment. Does this make sense? We were wondering if all right. Well, we'll try and make this clearer by talking about interest. So, what do we do with interest, Kanwal?
Well, let's dive right in. This is probably the critical piece for any application you build, any solution you have, anything that you roll out in your organization, meeting the basic needs and the basic needs of your users. So let's kind of dive into some of the basic ones. I mean, these used to be trends a couple years back. Now they're kind of the de facto standard, right? Your users work anywhere. They're not necessarily, the idea of a remote worker isn't one of a sales agent who goes out to meet clients. It's not of a field worker who goes out and works in a mine. It's a remote worker could be even somebody going from one cubicle over to another apartment and working at that cubicle. That ability for them to be able to work anywhere is critical. Number 2 is, how many of us actually are still tied to our phones even today? I see a few of you not just tweeting, but probably checking your emails right now and working, right? That ability to not have to be within the boundaries of a 9-to-5 work schedule is critical. And you got to make sure your applications, the things that you have, allow you to do that, work beyond 9 to 5.
And of course, users work on any device. So this is a picture of the 2005 commemoration of the Pope. And you'll notice a substantial difference between the 2013 one and the 2005 one. Devices are proliferate. Everyone uses them. And that point on, everyone is a mobile worker is really important. If you are an organization and you feel that we need to support mobility, but only for circumstantial scenarios, that's wrong. You really need to rethink, because everyone is a mobile worker now in the workforce. So the good news is that some of this is dealt with Office 365, but there's also some additional things that we need to consider.
So you got on any device, anywhere, anytime, right? But you also got to look at more and more people. Let's show of hands. How many of you work with more than 5 people? On average, within your
on a daily basis.
On a daily basis.
How many
right?
work with more than 10? How many work with more than 20? You would be surprised at how many people work with more than 20 people on a daily basis. So this is a huge, huge change, right? We work with more and more people, and we work anywhere, anytime, on any device.
And it's not just that. Let's add another layer, guys. Not only are you working with more and more people, but it's not just internal people that you're working with, your employees. It's also external vendors, partners, people that you're working across with. That's really starting to impact the way you're leveraging technology.
So think of that users work inside and outside the organization. So here's the challenge, right? This is all about driving interest and awareness. How many of you know about the fact that you can use external sharing in OneDrive for Business, in SharePoint Site Collections, and Office 365? Pretty much everyone's hand should be going up. Awesome. If you didn't know, now you know. Now, the second question is, how many of you feel like the majority of your users know that this exists? There is literally only like 12 people that put up their hands. Think about this for a moment. We just talked about you need to be able to work from anywhere on any device with more people inside and outside the organization. How come in your organizations users aren't aware that they have this ability? If you use the tools that we talked about in the keynote, that Microsoft talked about in the keynote slip, they talked about the importance of understanding what are all the SaaS applications that are being leveraged in your organization. And there's actually techniques now to quickly discover this. So how many people in this room feel like you have unsanctioned file sharing? Yeah, everyone, right? If you don't, I'd be surprised, and I probably could prove it that you do. So when you have unsanctioned file sharing, the most common reason when we ask organizations this question as consultants, the first response they give us is that, in fact, it's because we can't externally share. We're limited, right? We have this intranet or we have this other place we can store documents, but I don't have a way of externally sharing. So think about that. Many of you said that your users don't know that the external sharing exists, and so of course they're going to gravitate to other tools that may not be the best choice, especially when it comes to corporate strategy.
Well, this was on the roadmap, but it's recently been released, and that's the ability in Yammer, not just part of your external network, but the ability to bring in external people within your conversations as well. So now you can actually invite partners, folks that you trust, part of that conversation, and not necessarily they have to be part of the external network.
And so this is a big change because think about this. You may not have been aware of this before this week, right? Most likely you probably didn't religiously watch every single thing that came out on the roadmap, so you might not have known that external sharing at the conversation level is coming to Yammer. So certainly your users are probably not aware of this. So Microsoft is going to always communicate this and try and spread awareness, but it's not just Microsoft's responsibility, right? It's all of our responsibility to try and communicate in our organizations because these are needs that need to be met. And if they are interested, then hey, all of a sudden people start to use the technology a little bit more and we can work from there.
Well, let's kind of also mention that Microsoft's continuing to invest in the experiences that you're also having, right? Not just on any device that you have, but also the ability to be able to access any of the portals that are on Office 365 through your devices, whether it's an Android device, iOS device, or Windows 10 Universal. There's a couple apps that have just recently been announced. There's been the Delve app that's been announced.
Yep, and it's available for Android devices, I believe, today.
And I believe Office 365 Groups app was announced, hasn't been released yet, but that's been announced as well. And of course, there's the Yammer app, and I think Yammer usage has been skyrocketed through the roof because of the mobile app.
Yeah, we've got OneNote, we've got Skype for Business and Link, right? All sorts of different apps. So here's the question for you guys. How many of you feel like your organization, your users, know that these apps exist? Right? No one's putting up their hand. This is a scary thing, right? We need to make sure we're driving awareness and we're not just relying on somebody else to do it. Why? Because this matters. It's not like Microsoft's building this stuff because they like to build stuff. I'm sure they do. But the reality is they're doing it because customers are asking for it. People need it. And why do they need it? Because anyone, anywhere, anytime, on any device, right, with more and more people, et cetera, et cetera. All right. This is, we decided we put this one in here because we wanted to be realistic. So one of the things that we've talked about so far is apps, and we've talked about external sharing. These are only examples that we're trying to give you. There's many, many more we could talk about where you might need to drive more interest and awareness. We also have to be aware that our organizations may be limited, right? We may be on a legacy or previous version of a technology, and so it may be very hard for us to provide anywhere, anytime, on any device access in all the different workloads. So we're working on it, right? We now have hybrid connectors and the search service that's coming out in in this next cycle. And so as these new capabilities come out, later this year, for all those people who are on SharePoint 2013, and you're able to have that unified search experience and so on and so forth, you're going to be able to provide better experiences. But once you enable that, you also have to make sure you're championing it, that you're spreading the awareness, that you're spreading the interest, right? And please try and get off of some of these legacy technologies because it's really hard to meet and satisfy user needs and keep people interested if you're working on very old technology or you're promising things and you're not delivering on it. So keep that in mind as well.
That's right. Thank you. All right. The other thing you got to start realizing as well is that Office 365, for those that are currently using it or are looking to use it, provides telemetry metrics around the usage of your applications and the different products that you have as part of your suite. This is something that we do with a lot of our customers, right? We ask them nicely, hey, do you mind if we actually have a look at your telemetry data to see how you're using the product? A lot of times they come with a certain budget, they have certain ideas to increase adoption, and sometimes half of that time with clients, it's really about looking at the existing applications you currently have and how you can actually increase the adoption of those. And that's the important part, right? Getting more and more people to use the technology is important because that's going to provide a lot of additional feedback.
Yeah, so think of this scenario, right? In your organization, do you think that most users use SharePoint actively on a daily basis today? Right? In many cases, that's not necessarily true. So what value could we get if everyone started to? Well, lots, right? The promise of value is significant here. The potential latent value is huge. So the other question then is, even if they use it, what if they're only using 5% of it, right? And they're not using all the capabilities. They're not using workflow. They're not using advanced solutions. And I'm not saying SharePoint has to be the answer. Delve is much more accessible, right, when you think of ease of understanding how it helps me as a user. And so we have to look at these different technologies and understand if we've invested in Office 365, then we should probably get the maximum realization from our investment by making sure that people actively use each of these technologies, not just a little bit, not just actively, from a usage log, hey, I can see people are hitting it, but that they're actually also consuming, more advanced functionality and leveraging it in new ways and so on and so forth.
And I think the important part also is this is not about technology, right? It's not about making sure you're using more of the technology, right? It's about ensuring the investments you've already made, are you realizing the maximum value from those investments? So there's a chapter that Richard recently did on the Improve It book that talks about 60 adoption activities. He talks about different ways, things that you can do without leveraging necessarily technology. You can help improve your current usage of SharePoint, current usage of Office 365. I think there's one example that you mentioned in there, Rich.
Yeah, there's many, so there's like up to 50. So the point is there's lots of these activities. These aren't hard, complex things, right? Doing simple little campaigns that drive awareness and interest is all you might need to do. So take tactical steps towards driving awareness and interest. We have not just samples from my chapter, but there's lots of guidance in the book. Clearly this is a bit SharePoint-y, but this doesn't, what we're really trying to highlight here is that there's lots of community guidance on this subject that you can find. So interest is one thing that we need to drive. We drive interest, drive awareness. If you don't like the term interest, use the term awareness. We also need to guide understanding. So guiding understanding is really critical because the reality is people will come to their own conclusions. So this is a really, really critical idea. Now, we went back and forth. We simplified the amount of behavior and high-level slides because we want to get to some stuff you guys can use more actively. So here's my quick behavior thing, right? When you introduce organizational change, when you introduce group change or individual change, you always see an impact, right? And typically there's some sort of minor negative impact before you get to the positive outcomes that you're looking for. So here's the thing. You can accelerate this. The way you do it is you manage change. This is proven. So if I introduce something like Office 365 and I introduce a new capability to a user, we have to realize there's going to be some learning. So you can make this dip. That can be done in training and education and things like that, so it's less costly, less impactful to the business. But we have to recognize that there may be some dips. So when you're measuring output and capability and productivity gains, remember that your users, initially, there's going to be some relearning, retooling, and then it's going to take them a little bit longer initially until they really start to understand how the technology can work. The other big thing to note here is that we don't want to avoid the dip. A lot of organizations that we talk to, they say, well, we know that there's going to be a dip if we introduce all this change, so we're just not going to do it. Well, that's a really bad idea, because if you don't do it and you keep saying, no, I'm not going to do it, no, I'm not going to do it, I said no, beep, 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 right? And then all of a sudden, you're way behind, right? You're not competitive, and we run into big challenges. So hopefully this is in your organization, and you should be saying yes a little bit earlier, perhaps. So this is one of the visual tools that we wanted to share with you guys. I know a lot of people are going to be really excited because we're finally sharing, hey, some stuff. The big thing here is that when we started to look at the great work that's been done, Chris Slump's in the room, I saw Susan Hanley, they've both written awesome articles and posts on the subject. What we found is many, many times there's two very significant variables, right? One is the time sensitivity, and the other one is the audience size. And so while we could say that typically OneDrive for Business is pretty individual, right, from a benefit and focus perspective, and it's really best for individuals, or maybe a little bit into groups or small collections of people, we know that technically things like Office 365 groups or Yammer groups or other things are better for larger audiences. At the same time, we know that generally speaking, when we think of urgency, things like Skype for Business IM and Skype for Business web meetings and Skype for Business calls, those are much more urgent typically than email, which is kind of like the voicemail of today, right? You send emails and no one kind of looks at it. I don't know. I never look at my voicemails. So this is a really, really important concept, this sense of urgency and audience. But it's not the only variables. I see many of you guys taking pictures. I'm going to come back to this where this is actually useless, but that's okay. The idea here is you want to visualize. What we're doing is we're taking guidance and we're visualizing it. Remember that the artifact that you're seeing here is an outcome from learning and working it through in your organization. You can't just take this and implement it in your organization because it's probably not going to be true for you. So here's an example. What if your purpose is less collaborative and a little bit more communicative, right? So maybe you have different technologies within your visual matrix, right? This is an important distinction. So this is a dynamic matrix. It's going to be different for each organization. It's going to be different depending on what other variables you're considering. Another one that we came across often was official, right? This is an official tool, level of officiality, for lack of a better term. Or another one was External and internal audiences, that had an impact, right, on which tool maybe fits in which. So this is, if we had a really complex three-dimensional model and I was good enough with PowerPoint, maybe we would have built that. But hey, we're limited on time. So hopefully you guys get the idea that we're going for here. There was this big challenge we also ran into, which was kind of making your way from one of these lines to another. And I'm going to pick on Chris Slemp again because he did a really good post on this. One of the challenges we run into is when you go from something like OneDrive for Business and you think of the individual benefit. So everyone who uses OneDrive for Business, you get benefit, right? It's for me. I get benefit. I can use it for versioning. I can access it anywhere, at any time, on any device. It's awesome, right? Why wouldn't I use OneDrive for Business? So then we run into this challenge where a lot of organizations know that Office 365 provides value, but it means that people have to collaborate more. They have to work a little bit more openly, a little bit more transparently. Yammer is a great example of this, right? Where really the basis of Yammer is the sense that you're working a little bit more openly and transparently. So making that change in behavior from collective benefits, where I'm realizing those and I recognize that that's important, to individual benefits, that can be a big challenge. So let's just go through, we have a couple examples, right, of how you might do this. So one of them is you might take a document and you might share it with everyone. And that's a simple change, right? This document I'm comfortable with. It's okay for me to share this with everyone. Our public draft of the white paper, we could have put in a OneDrive for Business, shared with everyone folder, and shared it with all external users or something like that. So we can do this, and then everyone can start to access this. Now, obviously there's risks and other things here, so we need to make sure people know when to do this. But this starts to deliver value immediately.
I was going to say, look, if you think about the value, if you're in 365 today and you upload this onto your OneDrive for Business, the collaboration that's happening and the way that Delve works is going to be able to surface that content up to a lot of the people that you're collaborating with. If you start looking at, so in OneDrive for Business, it's very much cloud storage that you get the ability to upload documents. But how if we take it one step further, Richard?
Sure.
Right, and we start looking at taking that document, we want to work with the people that are part of our circle of trust, right? So we open up, we launch an Office 365 group, and we upload the document there. Now, all the people that are within my team have the ability to update that document. They have the ability to kind of share some of their notes around it, as well as files.
And then, of course, there's always ways to amplify that. So maybe now that we've started to get used to groups in this circle of trust, we might take a piece of content and really maximize how many people can see it and work a little bit more transparently by using Yammer conversations and publicize it to our internal Yammer network, which is a much larger audience, right, where there's potentially much greater shared and collective benefit. So these are sort of progressive steps, right, as we start to work more transparently. But what we're trying to do is help you recognize that moving where it looks really simple through this to different technologies sometimes requires a lot of coaching and teaching and education and also support as people learn to behave differently.
Right. Essentially helping that behavior, guiding them, showing them that moving from one product to another is going to actually give you additional benefit. And I think a lot of us, when we use products, we always think about what's in it for me. It's great the organization's giving this recommendation, but what's in it for me? Where am I going to get that value? So here's an example here that we just use of an organization. In terms of the target that they're looking for, they're absolutely gung-ho and excited about Office 365 and all the products that are available. And this is what they've mapped out in terms of their vision, their target, where they're looking to go. And today, if you would map out the products that they're currently looking at, they're using Skype for Business as well as for phone calls. They're using that for presence, instant messaging, as well as for online meetings. They're using SharePoint Intranet for primarily organizational communication news that they're using, both urgent news as well as for ad hoc news and announcements.
And of course, Outlook is used for probably way more than it should be, but that's the nature of business, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to introduce change, right? We're going to remember, this is visualizing the change that's happening in the business, maybe for a persona. This doesn't have to be for all users as an organization. We could do by persona, we could do by department or by a specific group, or even an individual as they journey through a progression. So maybe one of the things we do is we introduce Yammer. We introduce it at the company level where people can now share messages, and we have maybe Yam Jams and things like that from the executive level, corporate messaging, things of that nature. So there's some sense of urgency. There's certainly an organizational level to this, but you'll notice that there's not a huge amount of change that's injected because of this.
Right. So after month 2, for month 3, we introduced OneDrive for Business. All of a sudden, that connection that you had with Office 2016 as well as OneDrive for Business, you have that ability to be able to share documents, and you're not necessarily attaching them as part of emails. Now you're actually storing them in OneDrive for Business. So you start using that a little bit less, Outlook, and that's one of the key areas that we want to focus on as well.
So think of the scenarios, the use cases you use Outlook for today, there's going to be less of them, right? Because now OneDrive for Business is giving you some of those scenarios where maybe you used Outlook attachments, like actually uploading and adding the attachment. Now you're hopefully using sharing and other things within OneDrive for Business.
What you also see there is that SharePoint SharePoint team site usage increase as well, right? So more and more people are starting to say, hey, I can't attach documents in my Outlook email. Maybe it's time for me to actually start doing some team collaboration. So the usage increases as well.
And so this is pretty common, right? And more small groups is what we're seeing here, right? So group size is changing for SharePoint. It's being used for a little bit more small groups. And we're not going to go through each of these because we're aware of the time, and we want to make sure there's time for Q&A from you guys. But you get the idea, right? There's a sense of progression. There's a sense of change as we introduce new capabilities. And this could be organic. This might just happen. But what we want to do is try and visualize it. The reason we want to try and visualize it is because we're trying to achieve shared understanding just as much as we're trying to achieve individual understanding, right? So we want to take this information and maybe eventually change maybe our organizational guidance, right? As users start to change their behaviors, maybe we make sure that organizational guidance maps out to how people are actively using the platform and the capabilities. So now we have some scenarios.
Let's jump into these, Rich. Yeah.
Right. So
go ahead.
Oh, so we have 13 scenarios in the book.
Right.
I think, yes. Yeah, because we had more and then we got... So it's 13 right now. And we tried to pick 3 that showed different types of scenarios, a little bit different which technology might be a good fit. And this is an important one. As I mentioned, when we first started this, we took a question like, where should I put and share documents, which was asked of us, right, when we asked customers what would they like to hear. And we broke it apart. And we said, well, this is where you should put documents in these circumstances. This is where you should share documents. And the feedback that we got was, that's great, but that's not how people work. Right. So what we've tried to do is, in the white paper as well as in this presentation, is try and provide that higher level contextual feedback that's not going to be very particular or specific because people want more generalized feedback, believe it or not. So let's walk through where should I put and share documents. Well, this is a bit of a challenge, right, because a lot of times when we think of where we can put documents, there are options, right? We can put it into sites, we can put it into a OneDrive for business, we can put files within Yammer, attachments, stop doing that. We're hinting at what you're going to see as an outcome here, right? So we have places where we can put documents. Let's talk about OneDrive for Business, right? OneDrive for Business is so easy to store documents. It makes sense, right? It's easy for me as an individual to store a document. It's my document. I have a sense of ownership for it. I'm going to take care of it. It's my baby. No problem. You put it into OneDrive for Business, that's yours. If you need a temporary place for it, like we provided in that example with planning an event, great place to store documents is OneDrive for Business. So OneDrive for Business actually is a great place to put and share documents, but typically more about my documents or a sense of ownership of those documents.
Right. Then you start looking at, in terms of working with teams, whether it's a departmental team, whether it's a small team that's working cross departments, maybe you start leveraging Office 365 for groups. How many of you have started looking at 365 groups or already started using it? Awesome.
Good. Awesome.
Great. That circle of trust that you're working with, those are the folks that you trust, right? You want their feedback. You want them to improve some of the deliverables that you're working on, some of the documentation you're working on. They might be part of a project. They might not be part of a project. And that's the key, is that this gives you the ability to have a shared notes, ability to share documents as well.
And when you think about that sharing, that's important because when you think of documents, well, the Outlook web access experience is pretty fluid when I attach documents and do things like that. And here, if I have things in something like a group, it becomes also very easy for me to share it and do more and so on and so forth. So groups actually make a lot of sense, especially when you're not the owner. It's a sort of collective ownership model. A great place to store documents. But then there's also this thing called SharePoint, right? Which is pretty much the Cadillac of document storage, right? It's awesome. Everyone loves SharePoint in this room? Yeah, awesome. Come on, guys. So for all those SharePoint people, we'll try and get you shirts and books. We're totally biased. So, so where should you put and share documents? Well, SharePoint makes natural sense, right? When you want to share documents, just like groups, when you want to share documents with other people, things of that nature. But it has some subtle differences, a little bit more advanced functionality, right? A great example of this, you see status as an example. It's one of those columns. If we have metadata, it becomes a really strong place to put documents. If we have workflow, if we have related things like a list that's connected in some way, or we have the need for lists and tasks or more complex things today, that's where you might use SharePoint. So SharePoint is absolutely a place we should store documents, but so is groups, or so are, and so is OneDrive for Business, right? Those are all places we want to share and put documents. Well, again, we said that this is also about sharing documents. We didn't want to bifurcate the question. So when you share documents, the conversation view with Yammer is an incredibly effective way to share documents, right? Great way to get feedback, to improve visibility, to increase the IP in your organization so that more people can get the shared and collective benefit from your great work. And of course, all of this works well in Delve. Delve is a great way to share documents, but Yammer can be a great way to share documents. What about putting documents? Should we put documents in Yammer?
I don't think so, no.
No.
No, I don't think it's the right place to put documents.
This is where we finally have something where we're not sure if everyone in the audience is going to agree. So this is the fun part. So here's the thing, right? You can put documents in Yammer, and believe it or not, there are lots of situations where it makes sense. But generally speaking, when we have options like OneDrive for Business, when we have options like Office 365 Groups, and we have options like SharePoint, those satisfy those needs that we have from a document sharing, except a circumstance like Ignite. So what you've seen right now, if you go into the Ignite, you can see in the groups we have files. Those are all the presentations from the sessions, including this one. I think the presentation's up, and you guys can follow along or do some second screen, skip ahead, see what else we're going to talk about. And what we know is this is an effective way of sharing. Why? Because we actually have an external network. We have people that are expecting to see the content in that environment. It's not like you have access to all of the Microsoft internal environments so you can see the documents. It just makes sense, right? When you think of the level of effort, the way that the technology works today, this is an effective and efficient means to share documents with broad audiences where it's sort of an official document, right?
It's an official final, right?
We're not updating our document. It may even say, like, whatever the session code is, -final. I don't know, probably. But we haven't updated it. We're pretty bad, actually. We probably have some updates in our deck here that we need to update. But right now, that's the one that's being shared with you guys. So this is a circumstance where Yammer makes a lot of sense for sharing files. So this is why it's good that Yammer has the ability to share files, right? But we have to provide guidance at the organizational, at the champion and group level, and the individual level, perhaps when it doesn't make sense to use Yammer. Now, we all know this one. This is an obvious one, right? Stop attaching documents in Outlook. Stop attaching documents in Outlook. Right, guys? Yeah. Let's stop that. So we actually don't have an excuse soon for this, right? Because the reality is we actually, in the Outlook Web Access right now, if you go into Outlook in your Office 365 environment and you click attachment, it's kind of like a smart attachment. It says, what have you been working on lately? It shows you OneDrive for Business, the groups, the SharePoint sites. So this is a great way to share documents. And inside of an email context, it also gives you the ability to add people, right, to the membership of this item and things of that nature. Now, also keep in mind that in Outlook 2016, and I believe the preview, don't quote me on this because I only checked recently, but yes, I'm seeing a nod. So Outlook 2016 does have the ability to do the attachment, the smart attachment model as well. So soon, we really should see no one doing, hopefully, physical attachments. And then when you do get them, you can always send them back and say, I don't want this. Give me something better. So we want to share. This is a great way of sharing attachments, specifically by making it wherever it is, that's how it should be shared. We could have went into groups, right? Because actually, sharing with groups is a really effective way, even if it's in a OneDrive location, or even if the document's in SharePoint, right, as we do the shared with. If you haven't seen that, definitely look at the group sessions and they'll explain how that feature works, because it may not be in your tenant today. Another big one here is sort of the high-level guidance that comes from this. You'll notice a couple things here, right? The first one is that we actually have very clearly said that SharePoint makes sense in many circumstances. We've said OneDrive for Business makes sense in many circumstances, and groups make sense. But think of how many ways people could interpret this if we didn't have a bit of that conversation leading up to it. So this is the risk that you run, right? If you start to share this type of guidance and you're not having a dialogue or you're not giving them contextual information and scenarios and other things like that, you're going to be very unsuccessful. Trust us on this. It's very risky. So what you want to do, because it's confusing, right? Now I have 3 places I don't understand why, but we just walked through that. So what you want to do is the guidance you need to prepare, especially at the group or individual level, has to be situational, it has to be scenario-based, it has to be understandable for any user in the context that they work. So this, while we did this in the book, or the white paper, it's like a book. In the white paper, we did this. You can see and use it as a quick reference, but the reality is you definitely need to dig a little bit deeper. And you might ask questions like, why isn't Delve sharing right here? And you probably should. Maybe some organizations are actively using Delve, and maybe Delve has some level of a circle there, right? And there's some usage.
Well, we should be clear, right? This guidance is for today. Everything that's been released today and announced.
Right.
So this is going to change as well.
As soon as those announcements start to go into practice, of course, we have to revise our guidance. Now, also you'll notice Skype for Business. We didn't have time to get into all of the scenarios. So you can upload attachments. You can upload documents to meetings. Is that the place you should store and share documents? Probably not. It's better to link to a document, have everyone collaboratively work on the document in the meeting, and so on and so forth. All right.
Well, let's switch gears here, guys. We've already talked about document collaboration. Now let's start looking at finding someone with certain expertise. Right? That's probably the #1 reason why internet portals are being built, is to be able to find and collaborate and communicate with others. Right? A lot of times, what you end up finding is that I think the stats are around 70 to 80% of people go on to an internet portal, whether it's a SharePoint portal, a Yammer portal, or any other portal, to find people and connect with them. So let's kind of dive into the examples here. The first example here is on SharePoint. It's very easy to find expertise around the metadata that's stored around documents, as well as the documents that somebody has collaborated on. So if they've been a creator of the document, they've uploaded the document, or they went ahead and modified the document, their names are going to be attached to that document and that activity. And as you also start to fill out, you'll notice here Richard's done an awesome job filling out his profile, and I haven't. You'll see a lot more information in terms of when you search on ToDlead's website for executive or other skills, you're going to find Richard a lot more prevalently. And the great thing here with SharePoint's interface is on the right-hand side with the hover control, you'll see all the skills that he has, all the skills that the person that you're looking for, and even some of the documents that they've worked on.
So think of this, right? You find people through content, and you can do that in SharePoint today, right? I find content in all sorts of different places, and I always see who last edited it, who updated it, things of that nature. And that might infer skill set or expertise. Also, people fill out profiles. Some people don't. Kanwal did fill out his profile, but I'm a stickler, so I took a picture so he'd feel guilty about it for ages, that he hadn't had all his profile data filled out. But we also know that SharePoint actually supports some pretty interesting things, like the Active Directory information that's imported is also able to be seen, right? We have executive, which has actually come from the department that we're in. It also comes from the title, and so on and so forth. So this is a really robust way of finding people, and it works really well today. The next one is Yammer.
And another great way is Yammer. Right? At the end of the day, Yammer is the enterprise social network. There's a lot of activity, a lot of communication, not just collaboration, that happens on Yammer. So those signals, those ability of being able to search for people who, let's say in this example, are Office 365 experts, Yammer is going to provide you results that are going to be based on the conversations they're having, the tags they're part of, the groups they're part of, and the communication and the people that they're connected to. So it's going to be able to surface that information for you and share with you, here are the people that are considered the experts, or the folks that are most passionate about the topic that you're searching for.
So the quick answer here is that yes, Yammer is a great place to find expertise, but there's a caveat, which is if you're not actively using Yammer, if you don't have people with filled out profiles, if you don't have conversations, if you don't have content in Yammer, then it's really hard to find people using those capabilities, right? So there's sort of an expectation if your organization has really heavy Yammer usage, or you've got an awesome Yammer environment going, then this is a great way to find people and expertise. But again, there's some caveats, just like in SharePoint there might be.
Yep. And this is a screenshot of Delve. So the Delve experience today allows you to search for people, allows you to search for almost anything, right? Based on the permissions you have, based on the people that you're connected to, it'll give you the results that are important. On the right, you'll absolutely get the content that's related to the search result. And on the left-hand navigation, you'll get the people that are related to that as well. I think this is still a work in progress in terms of being able to find experts and being able to find people that are passionate about certain keywords.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do, there's a lot of amazing Delve screenshots from this conference, and there's a lot of amazing stuff coming. But we also have to talk about what exists today. So is Delve, the best place to find expertise and people by expertise today? In its current incarnation, most likely in your environment? No. Is it going to be in the future? Yes, absolutely. Is it going to be better than SharePoint and Yammer and all these other things? Yes. Why? Because you're actually searching SharePoint and Yammer and all these things together. So you get the benefit of all those things, plus machine learning and suggested activities and how people are working and all that other great stuff. So this is absolutely the future. But right now, it sort of works. It certainly works from a content, right, where content is the authority that provides the guidance for expertise. But naturally, for the core, it may not be as strong as perhaps SharePoint today.
And Outlook, obviously, that's probably the best place to find experts.
That's not correct.
It's not?
Kanwal.
What?
No, yeah. I knew you're going to make a mistake. Here's a shirt. And it's okay.
Oh, that's okay.
So Outlook. The problem with Outlook is when we want to find expertise in Outlook, we only know whoever we know, right? So we're only kind of. And have you guys been on those threads where it's like, I need help with this, and then it becomes like a reply all, and you're like, ignore. Does everyone know that ignore capability in Outlook? It's amazing. I know a lot of you don't. Yeah. So there was one person here. Whoever was that you who whistled? Someone. All right. There you go. Jay Willie gets it. All right. So. How to find someone with a certain expertise in Outlook, not the best way. Can you? Yes. Will it work? Yes. Is it optimal? No. That's what we're saying. Now, we could IM a person and ask them, hey, do you know someone with certain expertise? And Kanwal could be cheeky and say, he actually does this all the time. He says, let me bing that for you. Or he actually will type in like the whole URL, and he'll say, let me do a SharePoint search for that for you.
Let me delve that for you.
Yeah, so I'm bad at this.
That's right.
I'll admit I need to improve my behavior. So what we really need to do is we need to understand that, yes, this can work, but it's not always the case. Now, how many people in this room are like Link Voice superstars, rock stars, architects? Is anyone in this room? I see one or two hands. So, of course, some people might say, well, Link has an expertise search. You're absolutely right. In an on-prem environment, you can do a type of form of expertise searching, so on and so forth. Is it as robust as the other forms that we've said? No. Is it complementary in an and scenario? Absolutely. And will it perhaps come in future incrementations of Skype for Business? Perhaps, right? So this could change, but right now, generally speaking, Skype for Business and Outlook are probably not the best ways to find people with certain expertise. Now, you can infer from content within groups expertise. You can even ask people in a group for expertise. But is that the right place to do it? Probably not as good as doing expertise searches, and so on and so forth. Awesome. And Delve is going to change, right?
That's going to be huge.
When we drew the original matrices, we probably could have just done this, hey, year 2, year 3, year 4, and Delve and groups, and they become much more critical. So hopefully you guys are getting that from the conference. We also want to provide a note of congratulations or praise, right? So this was a bit of a fun one. We have some other ones inside of there. But this is one where Yammer really shines, right? Today, the best way to provide a note of praise is in Yammer. Because it's not just a note of praise or congratulations, it's sort of a collaborative congratulations.
It's a virtual pat on the back, right? It's essentially being able to tell, hey, Rich, you're doing an awesome job.
Thank you, Kanwal.
Right?
You're doing a good job.
Yeah. It's great to be able to do this in person in front of 2,000 close friends, but it's even better to be able to do it on Yammer, right? To be able to go onto your Yammer network and say on Ignite, Richard and Kanwal are doing an awesome job. Right?
Did you guys know you can do this? So seriously, you can go right now into Yammer, go to praise, go to Kanwal, Richard Harbridge, doing amazing, or just copy and paste what I've got for Christoph right there. He's doing awesome. He's right here. He's working hard on the next version of groups. So we can provide notes of congratulations with Yammer. Absolutely great way to do it. Now, can we provide notes of congratulations with email? This happens all the time, right? Group of people, distribution lists, things of that nature. We might congratulate people. What do we want? We don't want the reply all chains. So there's certainly correct ways or better ways, optimal ways of doing this. So we say do not reply all, so we don't get, hey, that was great, hey, and then you get, hey, everyone, there's an ignore function. Ignore, and then you don't have that problem. Anyways, so we provide a note of congratulations. This actually isn't a bad way of providing a note of congratulations. Now, it's better if you do this and you put the note of congratulations inside of Yammer, and you link to it, so that now everyone who actually wants to collaborate and share and say how great they are, they can put it there. Also think about this. If it's in Yammer, in this context, no one else is going to know about it once they join the organization or later as people transition from one department to another. But in Yammer, you can actually find all the praise that's related to a person. And it's a great way to understand all the contributions that person has made over their years in service and other things of that nature. Of course, a lot of people have meetings, and in meetings we praise people, right? So in a meeting you might say, hey, Joe, you did a great job this week. I just wanted to let everyone on the team know, regional meeting, maybe a department meeting, something like that. That does work, certainly, but is it the best way? Not without maybe a little bit of that Yammer. So do Yammer and Skype for Business, and maybe announce it in Skype for Business, put the link in, and when people put all those IMs, maybe you're that one person who says, hey guys, it would be great if you could put that in the Yammer, right? The praise, put the comments in the praise. Maybe just copy and paste them all and say, here you go, this is what everyone else was saying to congratulate.
And obviously, Yammer is not the only place. It's not going to be the only place to be able to praise people, right, Rich?
Right.
There's also, moving on to the next one, there's also Delve, right? I think it was announced, it has been showcased. I don't think it's been released yet. It is a proof of concept prototype, but the ability to praise and have that praise be showing up in your profile, that's going to start to become a bit more frequent as well. And that'll definitely be the right place to include praise.
So when you think about it, looking at this for a moment, we said Yammer is definitely today the best place for praise. But think about this. In a group setting, you could give praise, and actually now lots of people can have a shared commitment on that, can comment on it. It's a little bit more open, a little bit more public. So that's better than perhaps just locked to email. Right? In email, it could work if you do not reply all, perhaps using Yammer as well. And even in Skype, even though I've only put we decided only the one for this one, the reality is there's probably very few things that you can do that are better than, hey, let me do a video call if you can't talk to them in person and say, hey, just wanted to say, take a moment, Jeff, you just did an amazing job this week. Come here, bring it in. Right? So you want to, making it personal, we're not saying behavior-wise, change your behavior. We're saying there's proper ways to do this, but technology-wise, there are certainly optimal technologies to drive things like praise and notes of congratulations. And again, Delve is going to be soon the champion.
Up and rising star. So as we were mentioning, the white paper does have 13 scenarios, and obviously time was of the essence. We want to release the white paper for all of you to be able to download. But I think one thing is interesting is, Rich, when we kind of look at the summary of this, Outlook is not getting much love.
Yeah, it's really, really good for lunch invites because, you have an appointment and you can see who's accepted and who hasn't.
But that's yeah.
Maybe you can even I didn't want that person invited, and maybe say, it's rescheduled to them. And so you have options, but the reality is Outlook, here's the thing, right? Remember what we said, and this is true for many organizations. Outlook may be the most actively used tool, but it's not always the best tool. So what if we spread awareness and guide users to know there's better ways of doing things? Even if they don't adopt them, at least they're aware of it. And when they're ready to start doing these things, we can guide them on that journey with some prescriptive guidance and scenarios and other things like that. Cool. All right, so we talked about guiding understanding. We've talked about driving interest. Let's speed it up a little bit, Kanwal, because I want some time for questions. Let's talk about value. We want to maximize value.
You've got Office 365, you've turned it on, you've enabled SharePoint, you've enabled a lot of technologies. Number one thing to know is before you know what you can improve on, you've got to make sure you'll be able to measure it. So make sure that you're able to look at the adoption, look at the usage that's happening, and help increase that. That's the only way you're going to realize value. There's tons of great, there's tons of great partners who are doing analytics, but there's also some things that are coming as well.
Yeah, so in the product right now, if you're not aware of it, be aware of all the capabilities that exist today to help you understand maybe where you could have more usage, or ask your Microsoft sales reps who have even more access to telemetry data, and they'll even help you. And then beyond that, of course, we have more and more coming. And if you can't wait for this, which you shouldn't, because this is super, super important, because we can get so much value out of it if we just drive adoption a little bit faster, then you should look at third-party products, right? And there's lots and lots of ones in the expo hall. Of course, I've been trained by Microsoft. I'm not allowed to recommend any of them.
Web Trends?
No. So there's lots of other ones, too. There's actually, now we got to list them all. Good job. So there's I'm not going to get into this because then I'm going to. Anyways, the point is they're all different and they're all very capable. What you want to do is talk to customers, talk to the vendors, find out what's their difference, right? Ask a customer, what's your experience been with this tool? And keep in mind that there are more capabilities coming, but those tools all exist for a reason. There's gaps in the reporting data that exists today that really can make a big difference in terms of how you work. And take action. Some of those reporting tools even have the ability to take action based on the stats and other things. Really, really exciting area of growth. Now, the other thing we need to understand here is that it doesn't happen on its own. So this is a real study. There was basically a bunch of people that had heart conditions, and if they didn't change their behavior, they were going to die in 6 months. This wasn't that they might die. They were going to die in 6 months. So you need to change your behavior. You need to do these specific things. We're going to give you a very clear roadmap, give very, very clear guidance. You know the outcome. You have a full awareness and understanding. Here's what you need to do. And out of those people that were notified and communicated in this study, what happened, only 1 in 7 was able to manage the change on their own. Only 1 in 7 was able to make the changes. This is a life and death. There's no greater reason to change, right, behaviors and how you work. In this circumstance, it's not work, but change your behaviors in personal life, than life or death, right? But in this case, it didn't happen. So think about your organization. It does not happen on its own. It requires concerted effort. It requires proactive effort. It requires very, very specific guidance and action and sometimes even emotional effort as you work through with that couple users that are really challenging, right, into new behaviors and new ways of working. But it's really critical and really important.
Yeah, the landscape's changing, right? So if you want to help your organization be competitive and continue to stay competitive, look at the investments you're making and take advantage of them. Realize that full value. It's critical. And that's the important part, is if more and more people start using the application. In our example here, in our screenshot here, we're showing you Delve. If Office 365, more and more of you are using it, with the power of machine learning, Delve is going to give you more insights into how you're using SharePoint, how you're using OneDrive for Business, and how you're using Yammer. So that continued investment and being able to get the value of the technology is critical.
Yeah, Yammer is a great example, right? The more people use it. Well, Presence, right? Presence and Link. The more people use Skype for Business, the more people use Link, the more valuable Link becomes from a presence perspective.
Yeah, let's touch upon Yammer for a second. One of the best ways, right, to increase adoption with Yammer is to have ambassadors, have coaches, right? It's been proven fact that to increase the technology of Yammer, increase the technology or the adoption of any technology, is to make sure you're working with champions, working with those who can actually give you some benefits, share some of the issues they ran into and how they fixed it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is proven, right? People learn with peers, right? People learn from other people. And so we need to make sure when we're providing that guidance, I cannot stress enough, that group level guidance, that individual guidance is really critical, because those are the people that are going to scale, right? You can't spend, each of the people in this room, I hope you could, but you can't spend every waking moment helping people learn and better use this technology. You've got to scale through peers and other people and build those champions up.
And I think one more thing I want to add, Rich, is that it's not doesn't need to be IT, right? It doesn't need to be somebody who understands the technology from a technology point of view. It needs to be somebody who uses it on a daily basis and is passionate. So when you're looking at your ambassadors, you're looking at your champions, they don't have to be from the IT department. They could be part of a regional group. They could be part of a department. They could be cross-departmental. It doesn't matter. As long as they're passionate about it and they're willing to invest some of that time to answer some of those one-to-one questions, that's really what's going to help change that behavior.
Right. And think of this too. If you are struggling to find champions, there's lots of ways of looking at data and making sort of assumptions that who might be better targets, right, to spend a little bit more time and effort guiding. So one example, a customer basically looked at install rates, or basically who uses Chrome or Firefox or these other browsers where you have to take an extra step, right? You have to install it on your desktop to use it because it's not, there by default. And they looked at that versus the people who actually were actively using some of these other tools. And so they basically said, here's a user who has at least some level of technical proficiency or preference, and so they might be a better candidate for us to spend a little bit of time and energy on than, say, someone who uses, I'm not saying everyone who uses Internet Explorer isn't making these efforts. It might be a great tool for them. But I'm just saying there's different ways of looking at the data. And again, that goes back, right, so that getting additional data can really help you find, discover champions. And this is an ongoing process, right, over time.
So let's give them some resources, Richard. First and foremost, number one thing you can go to today on your phone even now is success.office.com. There's so much adoption templates that they have there. They have scenarios. They essentially have a framework.
Yes. So how many people have been to success.office.com during this conference at least? Not enough of you guys. This is huge. Who's been to it again? Put your hands up. I'm going to ask you guys for a favor. Let's just all give a round of applause for the work that Microsoft has done to give this. This is huge. Huge. So the team that did this was here. They did a session, I think it was yesterday, on this subject. It's in the notes in this presentation at the end. Please look it up. It is incredible how hard Microsoft is working to provide the guidance that you guys are asking for. What we need to do is we need to make sure that they're aware of what else you might need and keep that channel alive. We'll share some ideas of how to do that. And of course, we'll skip ahead because we need to kind of get to Q&A. So again, Kanwal had a section in the book. The reason I like this screenshot was it was for intranets, and what he was basically saying in this part of the chapter is he was saying, in an intranet, it's about 20% or less of the people that do 80% or more of the content. Right. And similarly, when you think about it inside your organization, not everyone is going to be a collaboration rock star. That's okay. Find those that are really going to be those great champions, make them more efficient, because odds are those are the same people that are really kind of the go-to people in a lot of those business groups, right? The people that are really getting stuff done. And of course, the formula for commitment. We talked about driving interest, guiding understanding, maximizing value. If we do those things effectively, what you're going to find is you'll naturally start to be able to drive and sustain commitment. Both at the individual level and organizational level, and then lastly at the group level. So speaking of sustaining commitment, this was probably the most important thing I wish everyone in here could take back to their organizations. I love Microsoft. They're doing success.office.com. They're working really, really hard on this problem, but it's not just their responsibility. I know, I wish it could be. I wish it could be the consultant's job or somebody else's, but it's not. It's our job to spread awareness. It's our job to drive interest. It's our job to guide understanding, because we know better our organizations than anyone else is going to from an outside perspective. We have more influence and we have more impact with communication in organizations than anyone else is going to. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use the other content and the resources and frameworks like the adoption plans and stuff in success.office.com. What we're saying is you still need to make sure you're taking your fair share of this ownership, because if you don't, you'll never be able to sustain that commitment because you're not putting forth the effort that's needed on your side. Now, here's the other cool thing. Microsoft really is doing some stuff. So we want to give some examples, right, of what Microsoft's doing. So one of them is there's this sort of tip model. If you go into Delve and you click on the little gear icon, you can say show tips. And it's like the first run experience. You know, there's not a lot of tips. There's a couple tips. There'll be more, I'm sure, as they introduce new features. And if they didn't, then I didn't say that officially that they were, and so on and so forth. All right, so what's new is a really cool capability. What it's basically doing is it's kind of walking you through, here's the new stuff in Office 365 that may be of interest to you. Right? What a great idea. And notice that this is contextual help. So actually, when you click on help inside of Office 365, no matter where you are, it's actually based on the context of what you're looking at. Am I in Mail? Am I in SharePoint site? Am I in a group? And so on and so forth. So a really, really great way to potentially find out what else can you do. Now, Microsoft's listening. So hopefully I don't get in trouble for this. I think every one of you should share feedback with Microsoft as much as you can, as many times as you can. So here's what I'm proposing. If you're looking for guidance and you can't find it today, and you really, really think that Microsoft can provide that guidance, then I want you to put it inside of the voice, and I want you to vote it up. And I want you to look for other people who've asked for the type of guidance you're looking for and vote it up. Because we need to share feedback with Microsoft in terms of what we would really help us, this type of guidance or this type of guidance, or maybe a little bit around this specific thing. And then, of course, hopefully Microsoft can respond to that, build it into the products and tips and things like that so it's more natural, or perhaps they can provide white papers or blog articles or other things. And there's lots of people who care a lot about this at Microsoft, right? So please, don't just tell them at the conference. Don't just tell me and Kanwal. We're going to do our best to share that. But share it directly. And this is a great forum for that type of conversation.
And once you submit it on there, you could go on to the Yammer Microsoft Ignite network as well and kind of have that discussion. Get a few more people. Maybe there are capabilities that you're missing, or there's certain ways of doing things on 365. Make sure you do that as well. And
there's lots of people who want to solve this problem. So you'd be amazed at how many people in the community are actively trying to solve this problem, who've had experience with this. So get a couple of them to work together with you, write some stuff, and then share what's worked for you, right? Don't just make it up to those people like Kanwal and ourselves, because our wives are not going to allow us, trust us, to write many of these papers. It takes too much time. So the other big one is things are changing. So Office 365 groups, Delve, these are connected experiences. These are experiences that naturally make it so it's much easier to understand when to use what, because in many cases it's suggestive, right? It's suggestive based on the behavior and the way that we work naturally. So over time, I'm not saying it's going to go away, this challenge of when to use what, but it's certainly going to improve. So remember this, even though it's going to improve, don't wait and do nothing. Remember, we said earlier, there's going to be a little bit dip. Don't be that organization that says, oh, beep, right? It's been too late for us to make changes, because there's so much you can do now and get so much value and realize so much value in the short term before these things maybe even come into place. And then even when they do come into place, if you've done a lot of these things, it's going to be so much easier to realize the full potential that these new features and capabilities bring. And of course, this is probably, this is our favorite slide, I think, from I'm so glad that the Delve team was kind enough to share this. So this is the vision, right? When you think of Delve, look on the right, my work-life balance, the stats, right? This idea that, hey, how many emails did you send outside of the workplace, and so on and so forth. We've talked about usage. We've talked about metrics. Those are things that at the organizational level you can take action on today. At the organizational level, over time, it's going to be even easier. And as an individual, I'm going to be encouraged through understanding of the tools and through this natural understanding that maybe I can change my behaviors and try different tools that maybe I haven't tried in the past. So again, this is a really exciting problem, this when to use what, because it's getting more and more attention, and naturally there's lots of ways we can improve upon this over time. So we've talked about the formula. Interest, understanding, value leads to commitment, and you need to have all three of those to get there. So what we're going to do now is just summarize next steps. You want to develop, this is guidance, right? In the white paper, we have quite a bit more. Use that as a starting point and develop organizational guidance, develop group or champion guidance, and develop individual guidance.
That's right. Make sure you check out the 3 key resources we mentioned today. Whentousewhat.com to download the white paper, provide your feedback as well. We'll continue to update it. Go to success.office.com. Microsoft's done an amazing job to provide templates, project plans, posters, whatever have you, there to kind of drive the adoption. And then, of course, the Improve It book shows you how you can leverage analytics to increase adoption. ImproveIt.how/book.
And of course, give us feedback. And when I say us, I mean the collective us, the community, Microsoft. Make sure you're sharing your feedback and share what's working. Not just, hey, I'd like to see this. Hey, did you figure this answer out? Maybe just for you. It doesn't even have to be for the whole organization. This is how I've solved this problem. Start sharing more and more of that. It'll go a long way. I'm not going to go through all these slides. We have a bunch of resources that we think are useful. You should look at all of these things. You should look at all of these things. These are specific if you're a Microsoft customer, of seat sizes. A lot of this stuff is going to end in June because that's their fiscal year end. So if your EA is coming up, give me a call or give your Microsoft rep a call, and I'll convince you to do lots of awesome things and take advantage of a lot of those discounts. We didn't have time. This is a session that literally covers like 20 technologies. So what we decided to do is just throw ones that we thought were pretty impactful, the ones that we've seen or we've seen early when we reviewed them with some of these wonderful speakers. There's a session tomorrow called Driving User Adoption from a technical standpoint with SharePoint Exchange, right? That's Laura and Lori
tomorrow.
And I can't remember the time, but it's tomorrow.
I think tomorrow morning.
Is it 9, I think?
Tomorrow morning, yeah.
Anyways.
So make sure you attend that as well if you're looking for some of the IT guidance.
And Steve is somewhere here. Steve also has a session on something Ninja. Thank you. Productivity Ninja, and it's going to be awesome. A lot of, like, if you're looking at Yammer and productivity and all these other things, and you're looking for that how-to guidance, maybe a little bit more prescriptive than what we gave, great place to get that guidance. Use these codes, too. Search in Channel 9. I don't know if you know this. All the presentations and video, at least that I've seen, from each day are basically produced the next day. Our video will be up tomorrow on Channel 9, and everyone else's from yesterday is up. So you can go watch those and kind of work your way through them. And, of course, join the Office 365 network. Please evaluate the session.
As well as praise. The session
praise,
on Yammer.
praise in
Praise
Yammer.
the session.
Yeah. And then this is our contact information. We've got, according to this, 5 minutes and 52 seconds. Give us your hardest questions and get prizes for when to use what.
Good job, buddy.
Please go to the mics if you've got a question, or really put up your hand and jump, and so I can find you. Okay, what's your question? I'll repeat it while we're waiting at the mics. Yeah. So the question is, what's the biggest challenge that you're seeing when you get people to listen and adopt the software? I would say the biggest challenge is that in many organizations you don't have funding, you don't have support, and you don't have executive leadership buy-in to help support and drive adoption. So what we have to realize is that this is the way to maximize the value the technology investments provide. If you don't do this, you're in effect buying the promise of value, but you're not actually realizing a lot of that value, right? So,
and the other thing I would add, Richard, is that it's a journey, right? So it takes time. So continue with that message. Continue working different ways, because some people are visual, some people like clear guidance. You know, work with your user base to give them the right guidance as well.
So we'll do this mic here. Yeah.
So the big issue that we're having is there's a lot of tools within our organization that are being, I guess, promoted from multiple different groups. And each group feels they have their idea, and then turn around and it's the end user that is also saying, well, I don't want any of those ideas. So now we're kind of fighting between different groups and the end users themselves. How do you propose us kind of leveling that field and trying to come to a collaborative approach?
Sorry.
So I think one of the big challenges that you're noting here is there's multi-phases to this, or multi levels, right? One
Feel
is
free to reach out to me. I'll get
sometimes
you a copy.
people work differently, right? And that's not a bad thing, right? Sometimes people prefer certain tools, and so what we run into is this challenge where if I have one group that likes to work a certain way, they're going to use certain tools that they're familiar with and they enjoy, and so that means other people are kind of almost forced at times to use those tools. Is that getting closer to what your question is?
Partially. I mean, I guess maybe a different way of rewording it. Should we go back down to the user level and see how they want to use things? Because as you mentioned before, we can give them all these tools and they still want to use Outlook. Should we go back and say, could you show us majority of the people in our organization how you want to
Okay, so
work,
if you're interviewing or watching from usability to assessment perspective how people work, it's great as a baseline. You have to be careful of a couple things. Sometimes you get champions who really know how to use these tools, and they're a great example, right? Exemplary individual. The caution I'd have sometimes is organizations, they do this, and they say this is how everyone's working, and that's awesome. Because we're obviously proud of our company, we're proud of the people. Some of these people are really smart and capable people. But we have to be critical, and we have to sometimes say, quite frankly, that we know from experience or exposure from other places that there are better ways to work. So think of even you, when you go to this conference, you leave the conference, you're going to bring that learning back, right? You're going to bring that learning back to your organization. So yes, you should absolutely interview, assess, and understand how people are using tools today. Sometimes you're lucky and there really are great examples. And then they're your champions, use their voice, qualitative studies, things like that, where you use anecdotes, like this is how they do things. It amplifies your messaging. But I guess my caution on that same side is sometimes that outward perspective can be really, really valuable. Is there someone on that one?
Yes.
Oh, your question?
I can
Sorry,
say
I'm
that
gonna
the
do the
Office
mic first.
365 groups will be a great place for small groups to get started. Then, should they become successful and this be a tremendous repository for information, can it be evolved into a bona fide SharePoint site with all the bells and whistles?
Yeah, it's a
How
great-
do I get that content there?
Yeah, so the question is, so there's normally this sense of maturity and progression, right? So sometimes people start off in a group, they have this sort of ad hoc collaboration in a group with a shared context. Over time, perhaps they decide that they need more robust capabilities for information management, lists, things of that nature, so they maybe go to a site level, a SharePoint site level. And then the question now is, I have content in my group, how do I reconcile that or how do I amplify that? Well, keep in mind that this is an easy thing to do. You could take content in SharePoint and share it with the group. So there's definitely ways, the other way to do it. There's also a couple ways. You think about it, you want to keep the metadata and you want to keep the content. So there's third-party tools that do a really good job of site management, SharePoint management, and they actually work with OneDrive content. In many cases, they can actually move group data, right? So they can take like group content as an overall thing and perhaps move it over. So if you're saying, hey, we started as a group, we realized this is great, but we want to improve it, maybe put a little bit more structure around it, things of that nature, then I would probably say today, you're probably going to use maybe a third-party tool to help that, just so you keep the permissions, so you keep some of the, well, permissions I guess is an easier one since it's groups, but so that you keep the base metadata, right? Like who last modified it, those dates, those types of things. And so that's probably a way. You could also do it manually. Does that answer your question?
Well, sort of, because I heard that these sites that are built under the group framework are not visible. Somebody referred to them as a hack.
That's much easier to answer. So in one of the group sessions, they talked about the future of groups, and they mentioned this idea of links or sites kind of being represented inside of groups from a profile perspective in Delve. If you haven't seen that, that's directionally how some of those transitions will be managed. Any other questions? We have literally 5 more seconds, and then we'll have to do them up here.
Where does persistent chat fit in this discussion?
Can you say that again?
Persistent chat.
Oh, persistent chat. I love that question. So link, right? Yeah. So persistent chat is a really awesome feature, and it's really powerful. In this type of circumstance, what you want to do is you want to look at that audience size, and you want to look at that urgency. You put it into that visualization, and then you have to think, when are the circumstances where, while persistent chat's really, really powerful, perhaps the visualizations and the way that, say, a Yammer conversation might work might be better, right? Or ways that a group conversation or the group messaging might be a better option. So unfortunately, because I'm out of time mainly, we don't have time to dig into it quickly, but hopefully that acknowledges that persistent chat is awesome. And it's really important, and you should definitely consider not just that, but outside of Microsoft, right? What other tools do you have in your enterprise, and how should you consider when to use those, and how do you provide guidance on those tools? With that, I'm going to jump down. We'll do questions up here. Thank you all for your time.